if I were a banker and you were the postal delivery man, and you came into my bank with your $1,000 check and you deposited it into my bank, into your account, I could go to the front of the bank and address everybody in the room there, and I could say, attention everybody, this fine gentleman here has just deposited $1,000 into our venerable bank. And now we have money to loan. And everybody would be happy because they know that many of them are there to borrow money, and they know that the more money there is to loan, that usually means the lower the interest rates are. So they're all happy. So some fellow over here says, well, how much did he deposit? And I say, well, $1,000. And he might say, well, that's not enough. I want to borrow $9,000 because I'm looking at this used car over here, and I need to borrow $9,000, but you've only got $1,000. I would then say, don't worry about it, sir. I can lend you $9,000. And he would say, where did the other 8 come from? And I would have to say, don't worry about it, sir. These things are more complicated than you can imagine, and you don't need to know these things. I can lend you the $9,000, and in fact, I can if I'm a banker. For every dollar, or every $1 billion that's put into the banks through the circle we just talked about, I, as a commercial banker, can create an additional $9 billion and push them out into the economy as loans. Now that $9 billion based on the $1 billion, which itself was created out of nothing, that was the foundation. That was the one that they gave to the government, that billion. Now that $9 billion comes into the commercial banks, and the banks now can create an additional $9 billion on top of the $1 billion. All of it is just fiat money. It's created out of nothing, but the commercial banks get the bigger end of the deal, as you can see. They can create 9 for the private sector called loans, and these are genuine loans, and that is where our money comes from. That is how money is created. Every bit of it is created in this fashion. If we were to take away all of the loans, if all of the loans in the world would be repaid, there wouldn't be one red penny in circulation in the United States of America. It would all disappear back into the computer chips and into the vaults. There would be no money in circulation. Every bit of it is based upon debt, and that debt creates money that literally has nothing behind it at all. Now this is how money is created in the Western world. And it's an amazing story, and only a few people, even within the banking industry, really understand it. I've talked to many people who work in the banks, and they read my book and they say, gee, I didn't know that. All they know is how to keep the numbers balanced in the columns and how to fill out the application for loans. They all have a job to do. Only a very few people at the top know how money really comes into existence. The creation of money out of nothing has had a devastating impact on the purchasing power of the American dollar. I might add, this process is happening to all currencies in the world that adopt this process, and that's most of them in the Western world. So what I'm saying about the American dollar also applies to most currencies in the world which have the ability to create money out of nothing, which they've given to their central banks. When you give men the power to create money out of nothing, you shouldn't be surprised if they turn around and create money out of nothing, because that's what they're supposed to do. Now, the underlying philosophy is that, well, we'll be very conservative about it. We won't run rampant. We won't abuse this power, would we, for our own personal gain or our political advantage? Heavens no, we would never do that. We are wise and wonderful people, and you can trust us, they say. So we give them blindly this power to create money out of nothing because we trust them to use this power wisely. Nowhere in history has this ever been a justified trust. Every time man has had that power, and this started back in antiquity, those with the power have abused it, and they have created more and more and more money at a rate much faster than the expansion of goods and services which are being produced by the productive side of the economy. Now, if the goods and services were growing at a rate which is exactly the same as the money supply, then the purchasing power of the monetary unit would remain constant. And in fact, it has happened that way wherever men have not had the power to create money out of nothing. For example, when money was based on monetary units like gold or silver. It's interesting, I think, to know that in ancient Rome, if you had a 1-ounce gold coin, that would be the cost of a nice toga, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of sandals. Today, thousands of years later, if you have a 1-ounce gold coin with no numismatic or collector's value to it, just a kugaran or a bullion coin of some kind, and you convert that into Federal Reserve notes, you can walk into a store and buy a nice suit, a handcrafted belt, and a pair of shoes. The real price of those items, and all items for that matter, throughout history, does not change when measured in terms of something of intrinsic value, such as gold or silver, because those things take human effort to produce as well as the belt, the toga, and the sandals. Both of them take human effort to produce, and that's why they maintain value with each other. But once you break that away, and you give men the power to expand the money supply without that discipline, they're going to expand the money supply faster than the increase in goods and services. And then you're going to have this difference in purchasing power. We call it inflation. And inflation, I think, is a bad word because really we think of inflation as rising prices. But in reality, what's happening, prices are not going up. It's that the value of the dollar or the monetary unit is going down. That's what's really happening if we understand the process. And it's a tax, therefore. Our lost purchasing power, what we have to pay more for a bag of groceries today than we did 5 years ago, comes out of our pocket, comes out of our earning capacity. That is value which we should have, but it's been taken from us through a process that we call inflation, but in reality it's a hidden tax. It's a tax that is more vicious than any other tax you can imagine. There are no exemptions, no deductions. Those with the least amount of money pay it to the highest degree. I mean, it's the most unfair, most unjust tax you can imagine. And that is what inflation is. Inflation is the result of being able to create money out of nothing. And that is the power we have given to the Federal Reserve System. Therefore, we can say that the Federal Reserve System is the agency of a hidden tax called inflation. I feel that our paper currency must eventually be backed by gold or silver if we are to have an economy that will protect the purchasing power of the common man. We must have it furthermore to protect our freedoms, because if we lose our economy, if we become totally dependent economically upon the state, then we've lost our freedom. We become vassals of the state. And all of this can be traced back to the fact that our monetary unit is completely valueless, or let's say it is valued only at the whim of our leaders. And that is a very precarious position to be in. I don't think anybody, if they thought it through, would ever say, that's the system I want, and yet that's the system we have. Congress receives its funding from various sources. Obviously, we think of taxes right away, and there's no question that taxes are a major source of funding. However, we know that Congress does not need income taxes at all, or any other kind of taxes for that matter, to fund its operation, as long as it has the ability to collect this hidden tax called inflation. If it were to stop all taxes whatsoever, it could still continue to spend exactly as it is doing, simply by inflating the currency a little more than it has been in the past. Isn't that an amazing thing? Congress does not need taxes, and yet they talk constantly about taxes. They want us to focus on the taxes, because this we can measure. We fill out the form at the end of each year, but the GEO is a 30% or a 40 or a 50% bite. And we can see the tax bill on our sales receipt, what we paid to the state, and we can look at those numbers and we complain about them. But the bigger menace is this hidden tax called inflation. We never see those numbers, except that somehow at the end of the year we worked like dogs and we got a little bit of a raise, but our standard of living went down. And that's the tax I'm talking about. This is where Congress gets a great deal of its money, if not most of it, and where I think it plans to get most of it in the future.